Hi everybody, and welcome to Seeking the Sacred Earth. This is Inner Child, Part 2, Reclaiming. In the first video about inner child work, I was discussing the narcissism and codependency polarity and how our wounded inner child and its level of healing or distress puts us somewhere on this spectrum in each of our relationships with other human beings. Today, I want to discuss some practical steps that we can use to reclaim that inner child so that we're not on either side of that spectrum, attracting stuff we don't want or being someone we don't want to be. Great book, John Bradshaw's Homecoming. This book was recommended to me at least 10 times in my healing journey. And when I finally read it, it really changed my life. One of the major concepts he discusses is toxic shame, and how shame is really floods that energetic clay that we are really right from the get-go. You know, we live in a very puritanical society where, even though it's 2018, we're still very much, there's a lot of guilt thrown around for just being sexual beings, or children just being loud and full of energy. There's a lot of things that can suppress our natural inclination to express joy and bliss and curiosity. I know personally for me, I'm an incredibly curious person, right? Books are my main source of pleasure. And as a child, I asked so many questions, and there was a lot going on around me that was confusing, and I was directly asking questions about that. And I was told often that children were to be seen, not heard. That energetic clay, that was me, that created a lot of distortion. So this book was really powerful for me. Basically, one of the main concepts that he works with is that there are different developmental stages, and we need to go in and check in on ourselves at each of those stages in the past. First one being infancy, second one being toddlerhood, third being preschooler age, fourth being grade school age, and fifth being our adolescent self. So those are the 5 stages to work with. And I think as I work through them, it's pretty accurate. Although if you had a really traumatic childhood, all of those can be subdivided. So let's just start with the infant self. Now, not a lot of power is given to infants in our culture, of course, because they're dependent upon us. But I would like to challenge the idea that infants are not aware of what's going on. I know from my own son and my relationship I began to have with him as he was born, they are so aware of the energy around them because, as I said, right, we're born as this perfect ball of energetic clay. And because it has had so little distortion and imprintation, it is very receptive to anything that is going to be molding it. I would venture to say that it's our most sensitive time, and a time where we should be treated with the most sensitivity and grace and care. So what he suggests is writing a letter, adult self, to that infant self. So, for instance, my birth was full of fear for the adults around me because they thought that I was possibly going to be, severely deformed. There was a chance that I was going to be blind, have a cleft palate. They didn't really know how I was going to be turning out when I came out of the womb. So it was somber. It was a somber event. Also, my mother had been dealing with severe depression, anxiety, and trauma within her own relationship with my father. And so there was all that going on. So when I did this work, my letter as an adult to this infant baby was, Dear infant Lynn, dear baby Lynn, I am so happy you are being born. I wish we could throw a party for you here. I'm going to throw one for you now. I'm so glad you're a little girl, because oftentimes the information came to me that my mother had wanted a son and was a bit disappointed that I was a girl. So in the letter, I'm so happy you're a girl, and I'm so excited for this life we have ahead of us. I am always here for you. I'm sorry I wasn't there at your birth to celebrate this, but I'm here for you now. So these letters that the adult is writing to this infant, the way that we can really connect to what does this infant need is to really spend a moment, spend a hot second, and think about the birth experience as you've been told it went down. And if you don't have any information on it, ask your mother or your father or your siblings. If you have these people alive in your life and you have access to them, ask, what was that birth like? And what happened to you after you were born? Were you able to be with your mother immediately, or was there birth trauma? Were you taken away? Were you born well, or were you born sick? Were you born on time? Were you born a preemie? All these things matter to that little infant, because what we're learning is that when infants are not given directly to the mother and have that heartbeat, her warm skin, her smell, the sound of her voice, they perceive that separation as abandonment. So the next step is to allow the infant to write a letter to the adult you. And you do that by using your non-dominant hand. Now, I was resistant to this when I first tried this. I'm a perfectionist, and writing with a non-dominant hand is 1, hard, 2, messy, and 3, it is completely, beautifully imperfect. So you allow that infant to write to the adult self, and what will come up will surprise you, because oftentimes the infant was afraid and confused and didn't know what was going on and didn't have anybody to tell them. You know, now from the knowledge I've gained by being a mother and really studying a lot about the birth process when I was pregnant and prior to that, is that one of the best things we can do for the humans who are small and just born is to talk them through each step of what's happening. Even though they may not understand the words, what they will be absorbing is that secure sense of, I am being covered, I'm being considered, and I'm being told what will happen. And that's a sense of security that can neutralize any sense of abandonment from any of the birth trauma. So start there with the infant. And then we go to the toddler. And that was interesting too for me, because, right, chaos in my home. And the adult writes the letter to the toddler, and then the toddler with the non-dominant hand writes the letter back to the adult. And I encourage you, as you go through these phases, and you write the letter as the adult to each part of the inner child, and the inner child is allowed to write back to you with non-dominant hand, I encourage you to read the inner child's letters aloud, to really let them be heard. And even better, if you have someone you really trust in your life, and if you do, you're lucky, read these letters to someone else. Use this exercise to actually enrich your relationship with those you love the most. Letter writing in general, I have found, is so powerful. You know, one of the concepts that really, just got me addicted to this letter writing is that you can write a letter to a person that you may be having troubles with, really get it all out, read it aloud, and then burn it. And in that act of expression, you're able to express your anger and integrity in a way that amplifies your sense of self-worth instead of acting out on it. So as you allow the inner child to write these letters, you'll find that maybe that exercise will also be useful to you as an adult. In many ways, this work is time travel. It's quantum jumping in a way, as I've discussed in a different video, because we're literally going back to a time-space point. And by allowing that being that was not able to express itself, we're untangling the toxic shame. We're untangling the trauma. We're untangling the emotional stress. And that ripples throughout your entire existence and throughout what we consider time. So, you know, one concept as I leave you with this last piece, that inner child, that infant, is the first layer of yourself. And then each moment of time is superimposed upon that layer. So it's like the Russian dolls that, you know, build upon themselves. We have our infant self. Then what covers that is the toddler self. Then the grade school self. Then the adolescent self. This is how we grow into, you know, the very present moment, which is the last layer that we are expressing. So if we really want to be our best, fullest, most awesome self, really here to like serve and make a change and bring our greatest creativity and wholeness forward, we have to address those first inner layers that are actually the most powerful ones, because they're projecting that first energy that is still running and that will run until our death, and some say even beyond that. So this is vital, powerful, magical, scientific work, and I encourage you to try this letter writing. And, you know, if it's too overwhelming, make sure you have someone with you. But the truth is, as much trauma as I've survived, it wasn't overwhelming. What these children, my inner children, wrote back to me with the non-dominant hand letters was incredibly insightful. Huge breakthroughs. And yes, I cried as I read some of these letters as they were being written. But it was that release that untangled those distortions and frozen bits in my energetic clay. And as they were released, I had more room for what? For joy. For serenity. For love. And more inspiration to be doing what I'm doing here with you guys, which is sharing my story fearlessly in service of all of us. Because we are all the same in this way. We all have these inner children who are so ready to be seen and heard, just knocking on our door. And that knock can look like illnesses and mental issues and obsessive thinking and relationship problems, financial problems, goals not being met. But we can take the responsibility as adults. So this is the first step, this reclaiming through letter writing. Let me recap really quickly. The adult writes a letter to the infant, to the toddler self, the preschool self, the grade school self, and the adolescent. We do them each phase on its own. Then you allow the infant with non-dominant hand to write a letter to the adult. And you read them both aloud, by yourself, with a person you love, or with a group. Then you go through the phases. You do each one the same way. When I first did this book, I did one a day in a 5-day period. I took a week to really just fall in love with these inner children. The next phase after you do the letter writing, which is what the third video will be about, is really about the visualization of, taking these inner children as we become our own parent, and I'll get into that in the third video. So look at John Bradshaw's book. There's actually a lot online about it, but I recommend getting it. There's a lot of used book options on Amazon for it, so you can save some trees. And try this out, you guys. Thanks so much for your curiosity. If this resonates with you, please share it with people, because I think right now this is the most important work we can be doing, because it's how we change ourselves that we will begin to see change in our outside world. Bye, guys.